Of course, one of the key aspects in relationship marketing and retaining your most profitable customers has to do with customer satisfaction. And I'm sure that you've discussed customer satisfaction in other marketing classes and in other business classes. And perhaps you've already have been exposed to customer satisfaction models, but I thought I might go back through and review them with you so that you have a little bit better, more theoretical understanding of how we view customer satisfaction. Of course, whenever I think of satisfaction, I'm reminded of my buddy Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones with their famous song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Now, we're going to discuss the two most popular models of customer satisfaction and then talk about what the implications of those are moving forward. The first model I want to discuss is called the equity theory model of customer satisfaction. And of course, in this theory, the argument is that customers evaluate their particular purchase, product use, or experience based on whether or not it is equitable. That is, whether or not the outcomes of the purchase or use match the inputs. And I try to compare those then to someone else. So an example of equity theory is you and I go out to a restaurant to have dinner. You order the $15 meal and I order the $30 meal. And when your $15 meal comes, it's a beautiful presentation. The food is great and there's a large quantity of it. When my $30 meal shows up, it's a much smaller portions. The fact is that the meat is tough, and in general, the meal does not appear to be worth $30, given the fact that I saw your $15 meal. So the equity theory approach, it really has to do with me comparing my inputs, that is my costs, with my outputs, that is what I got in return for that money, compared to your inputs, costs, and your outcomes, that is what you got for your money. And if they appear to be equitable, then I'm satisfied. If I think I got a better deal, then I am even more satisfied. But if I feel like yours was a better deal and that I wasn't my transaction wasn't equitable to yours, then I'm dissatisfied. There are lots of places where you can see this happen. An example of this might be you go out and you buy a brand new set of golf clubs, and they're sort of high quality clubs, and you get a pretty good price on them, and you are in theory sort of relatively happy until you go to the golf course and your friend is there and they've got even a better set of clubs and they paid less money for theirs than you paid for yours. Now all of a sudden that transaction you made for those golf clubs is not as equitable as you viewed it previously, and as a result you're not as satisfied. Probably one of my favorite Las Vegas stories about equity theory is what happens when you slow down for a school zone. Many of us have had this experience. You come to your school zone, you slow down to 15 miles an hour because it's the law. All right, and then as you're going through the school zone at 15 miles an hour, someone blows through the school zone and passes you going 40 miles an hour. And of course, you become outraged. You are extremely unhappy and you are dissatisfied with the situation. Now, why are you dissatisfied? Are you dissatisfied because that person went through the school zone and could have injured kids? No, that's not really the case. Really the case is that you don't find the situation equitable. You slowed down and your outcome was you didn't get a ticket. And then they sped through the school zone and their outcome was they didn't get a ticket. So it doesn't seem equitable to you. And in fact, it would only be equitable to you, and you would only go from being outraged and dissatisfied to satisfied if there was a motorcycle cop at the end of the school zone and they pulled over the speeder. Then, all of a sudden, you see the situation as equitable and you are satisfied. So this notion of equity theory is an important notion. There are lots of situations where I compare my costs and what I got for that money to others' costs and what they got for their money. And if I feel like my transaction was equitable or better, I'm satisfied. If I feel like my transaction was not equitable or worse, then I am dissatisfied. So what are the implications for this? Well, the implication for this is that you want to make sure that if you have customers that can easily compare their outcomes and their inputs to others, that you try to make sure that things are equitable. If you have a higher priced meal, it ought to be a better meal than a lower priced meal. If you have a regular and deluxe car wash, the deluxe car wash should be noticeably better than the regular car wash. The other implication for this is to try to make sure that people find it difficult to compare their costs and their outcomes with others. You might do this by not disclosing any prices, those sorts of things. You might want to try to tell people, I gave you a great deal, don't tell anybody else about this. And of course, they're doing that, and it may be perhaps in part to try to make sure that it is difficult for people to compare their outcomes and inputs with your outcomes and inputs. The next model, and perhaps a more often considered model for satisfaction, is called the confirmation-disconfirmation model of satisfaction. This model was developed by a guy by the name of Rich Oliver, who I went to school with many, many, many years ago at the University of Wisconsin. And I find it relatively humorous that he is the father of this model and this often used model of satisfaction, because Rich was a always dissatisfied person who always seemed to be in a bad mood and was always unhappy with virtually everything that was going on around him. And so I do find it a little bit humorous that he's the person who came up with this model of satisfaction. Maybe it's because he was never satisfied with what was already out there. So here's how this model works. This model is based on two things that happen with the transaction. The first thing is that before the transaction takes place, before you stay at a hotel, or before you buy a car, or before you have a service done, you have already an expectation. That expectation is perhaps based on previous experiences, maybe some research that you did online, what others have told you about the situation. But no matter what, you have an expectation. And then once you experience the product and make the purchase, you evaluate that product, whether it's a good or a service or an experience or whatever else it might be. You evaluate that, and you evaluate it compared to your expectations. All right, and so the comparison is your expectations versus your perceived performance and evaluation of the particular product, good, service, experience. And of course, one of three things can happen. The first thing that can happen is that the product is meets your expectations. The product is just the way that you thought it was going to be, and in fact, your your expectations have been met. This then results in what is referred to as confirmation. Okay, that is, things turned out the way that you expected them to turn out. When I go to church, my understanding and my social contract with the church is that church should never take more than an hour. So if church gets out at the 1 hour mark, then I am satisfied because my expectations were confirmed. Okay, well, what else could happen? Well, it could be a positive disconfirmation. So take my example with the church again. It could turn out that instead of church lasting an hour, it only lasts 45 minutes. Well, it in fact exceeded my expectations for how long it was going to be. My expectation was that it was going to take an hour, but it was less than an hour, and as a result, that is a positive disconfirmation. That is, it didn't turn out to be as long as I thought it was going to be. This is sort of when you wait in line, so you're waiting in line to get a service. And you say to yourself, well, this is probably going to take about 30 minutes, but it only takes 20 minutes. Well, what happens? Well, you have a positive disconfirmation. It turns out that it was better than you expected it was going to be. And so this results in a positive disconfirmation. But there is a little bit of a kicker with this, right? Because it didn't take as long as you thought it was going to take, your expectation is that the next time it's going to be faster than you previously thought. So your expectation is that next time church won't take an hour, it's only going to take about 50 minutes because it was only 45 minutes last time. Or standing in this line is only going to take 20 minutes because that's how long it took last time. So one of the issues with a positive disconfirmation is that it changes my expectations. It increases my expectations. So the third thing that can happen is that you compare what your expectations are with your evaluation. And it might turn out that your expectations weren't met, that you were disappointed, that it was worse than you expected. This results in a negative disconfirmation. And you, of course, are dissatisfied. You go away disappointed, but one of the other side aspects of this is that probably your expectations are also diminished. So that's both good news and bad news for the company, because it means that the next time you go there, your expectations won't be as high. But on the negative side, it may turn out that your expectations are so low, you decide to never go back. Okay, so what about the other implications and notions associated with the confirmation-disconfirmation model of satisfaction? All right, well, first off, the customer defines the expectations, and in reality, the customer also subjectively determines whether or not the expectations were met. Customer expectations are formed by past experience, competitive offerings, and, of course, the most recent experience with the good or service. Customer expectations are dynamic. That is, they change over time. Sometimes they get better, sometimes expectations go up, sometimes expectations go down. And then finally, of course, customer satisfaction delivered by everyone in the organization requires total organization commitment and involvement. So you need to have a customer satisfaction plan. Some of the key notions to a customer satisfaction plan involve top management. Get to know your customer. Get close to your customer. Find out what customers' wants and needs and requirements are. Let the customer define the important attributes. Know what your competition is doing, because your customers will, at some point in time, be exposed to your competition, and you want to make sure that when they compare you with the competition, you come out on top, and be committed to getting better and better and better and doing a better job of satisfying your customers. Three other last points. Number one, overpromising is a problem. If you try to convince people that the product is going to be absolutely fantastic, then the problem is that it's going to be very difficult for the organization to reach that level of expectations. So overpromising is a problem. Underpromising is also a problem, right? Because if you underpromise, it turns out that many people will decide not to even experience your product because your expectations and view of the product is so low that you decide that you would not you'd not be interested in making that purchase and experience that product. And then finally, and most importantly, expectations need to be managed. Here's an example. You have a restaurant. It's a brand new restaurant. You go to it the first time. It's wonderful. The service is great. The food is great. The atmosphere and the environment is great. And you are wowed by the experience. When you leave the restaurant and you are extremely satisfied, but your expectations have also gone up. But you're so happy with the restaurant, you decide to take a couple of your friends to the restaurant the following week. And of course you do that because your expectations of the restaurant are so high. The problem is the second time you go to the restaurant, the service isn't quite as good, and the food's not quite as good, and the atmosphere is not quite as good. And as a result of the first time that you went to the restaurant and comparing it to the second time, while the experience was probably fine, you're not satisfied with it because it wasn't as good as it was the first time. This is a tricky situation where where businesses have to be careful when they manage expectations. I've been around a lot of companies who always tell their employees, you need to wow the customer. Our goal is to wow every customer. Our goal is to exceed expectations. That's really not a very good way of thinking about satisfaction, because as you increasingly exceed expectations, the expectation levels go up. And eventually, what's going to happen? You're not going to meet those expectations, and your customer is going to be disappointed and dissatisfied. So it's crucial that you figure out a way to manage expectations over time.